How about
testing?
now?
Is our audio working
Can
now?
you hear us now? Okay, welcome to Arcade
Hello.
Mark.
Sorry, I'm guessing that this probably happened because I just updated to Windows 11.
Oh, it definitely happened because of that.
And some things are just a little bit funky and have to get reset after that. So, this is an episode about if your games are getting repetitive or stale from either the player or the GM side. And so we're gonna start by talking about here's how you can tell. And the first,
right. But the question is, how do you determine whether your games might be getting repetitive? And once you figure that out, there's some easy ways to fix it. But the first thing that we want to talk about, even before we get into that, is the fact that repetition is not always bad. Most of the rest of this episode is going to be about identifying when you have too much repetition and then fixing that problem. But having a little bit of repetition can actually add a through line to your campaign. It can help make something feel like there's a theme. So there is an extent to which you can have a certain amount of repetition and it's going to go great.
It can make things feel more familiar. Like if there's a recurring villain with a specific calling card, then it can really help make that character iconic.
That's right. And so what you need to determine when you're figuring out if your game is getting repetitive, either as a player or as a GM, is not just whether you've ever repeated anything, but it's whether you're repeating things too much. And so back when we were muted, Linda was saying that there's a scale of how easy this is to figure out, and the easiest way to figure it out.
Yeah, the sort of most obvious thing is you are getting bored of doing the same thing over and over again, or someone else at your table tells you that things are getting repetitive and stale.
If you're the GM, they tell you that that's happening in the game. If you're a player, they'll be like, dude, this is like your 10th drow loner character who's an orphan and who has strange and unique magical powers.
Or let me guess, you're going to bring a drow loner character who has strange and unique magic powers.
Yep.
When you're building your character.
And so this could be from a lore perspective, like that one that we were talking about, or from a mechanical perspective. It's like, let me guess, you're gonna cast Fireball again.
Yes, or like, all right, yep, you're gonna use sudden charge with your greatsword.
Yep.
Whatever this character is, that's what they're gonna do.
You're gonna sudden charge the enemy, and then you're gonna make a second attack with your third action. Right? And you're up next to them already. Then you'll do something, you'll do the other thing you do when you're next to the enemy. That's slightly different. So there's both mechanical tells for repetitiveness and lore-wise. And it's easy if someone's telling you this is repetitive, or if you are realizing this is repetitive. But a lot of the time, there's certain things that we just repeat because we like them or because they're a go-to. And we haven't actually realized that we've done it. Yeah,
so I would say another tell, it's not always boredom that's kind of like the most obvious tell, but sometimes it is familiarity to a high degree. Like, are you finding that, for example, you don't even have to think about your turns because you have a script and you just follow that every time? Are you finding when you're writing, you're a GM and you're deciding what's going to happen next, that everything just flows incredibly smoothly and it all comes out really quickly? That could just be like, oh man, you're amazing at prep. But sometimes when things are going a little too smoothly and you notice that things are going smoothly for a while, it's because you're retreading familiar ground.
Or the players just smoothly predict all the twists.
Yeah.
And
or the players like, this is probably a demon again, because it's always a demon.
Yes, and Rico in chat says it's similar to the Street Fighter series flowchart for Ken, where 80% of all of the attack paths led to Dragon Punch.
And Rohit points out an excellent thing to consider is that repetitive from the player side can come from repetitiveness and encounter design.
It definitely can. So you need to determine when you see repetition, there are techniques to use, and we haven't gotten to that yet, but one of them is to determine what the actual source of the repetition is. Because it might not be what you think it is.
Yes.
But first, let's talk a little bit more about identifying it before we get into fixing it. Because that seemed like it's an identification issue, but is actually partially a fixing issue, is going down and realizing whether it's a symptom or a cause.
Yes.
So let's say that it's a little trickier than that, but you're getting a sense. you're getting a sense there might be repetition. They're getting a sense that it might be getting a little stale. You need to shake things up. Maybe because the players are guessing things, but they're not guessing them so obviously that they're saying, oh, it's always a demon.
But you are finding, that players are using very similar solutions and approaches to what you're that is why I wanted to bring that up here, is like you're the GM and you're like, they always seem to do X.
Yeah, or they feel similar, or you're just getting a vibe that it might be, or even you have no idea and you want to check. Because sometimes you don't get any vibe, but you actually, maybe you are being repetitive. So here's what you do. Try to think of things that are like your favorite kinds of elements, whether you think you've repeated them or not. To start a list of what might be repeated elements. Not that having any repetition, again, is a problem. And just kind of jot them down somewhere that you're paying attention.
So, for example, is there a creature type that you are very frequently
Let's
using
say you
as an
love
adversary?
demons, because we used that before. So you could put demons, or dragons if you love dragons. You can put dragons. Now, obviously, don't go too far on the other end. There have been serious situations where even, like, professional role-playing companies are like, well, everybody does dragons, so let's just not do dragons, and then they just wind up underusing dragons, right?
Yeah.
So, but make this list not as a list to never use, but as a list that you can start tallying it up. And once you've made a list where you're tallying things up, if you start noticing that you've done something a couple or a few times, you can add it to the list with tally marks.
And it doesn't just have to be like monster types. It could be, for example, a one-sentence description of prominent NPCs. And if it's like, oh, yeah, this person is
It's like they always have thick eyebrows and the gruff attitude, but are really a kind person.
Yes.
When you get to know them. And it'd be like, wow, I've done that 8
or it's
times.
Like, I think another way that you can kind of identify this is that if you feel yourself really resonating with a particular thing in what you're creating, you're like, man, this really jives with my experience, then, it's a good idea to take a step back and be like, do I have a lot of characters that are secretly proxies for people who are irritating me in real life?
Yeah, I mean, it could be.
There's always going to be some degree. I mean, that's part of creating, is that you're going to consciously and subconsciously echo your own lived experience. But when you do notice yourself doing that, it's worth asking, like, am I echoing this particular experience a lot?
And it might also not be lived experience. It could just be other things in other media. Like, maybe you have a particular thing where, like, so many of your villains are just, like, polite. And they'll, like, talk to you and they'll explain what they're doing in that kind of a way because you liked a lot of those kind of villains in books and movies.
Or maybe you really tend to follow a particular trope, or maybe a particular trope or stereotype bothers you, and so you always go out of your way to subvert it in a specific way.
To the point that maybe your things have become a stereotype of being the opposite of that
like
stereotype.
Maybe you're like, I'm tired of goofy goblins, and so every single goblin that you portray is serious.
Is totally serious and is just sighing at goofy goblins, and it'd be like, wait a minute then. In this world, they kind of aren't goofy. They're all serious and upset about this goofy thing that doesn't exist. Now, that could actually be something that you want to create as a world plot point where goblins, maybe in the ancient past, were goofy, and now modern goblins mostly are serious and are upset about that. Like, you could do that. You can turn something into a plot element to the world. Or if it's always demons, like, the answer could be maybe demons just, like,
are a major
really
threat
common
in this setting.
And are super major in this setting. So you can think about it. The answer isn't always to cut back. Once you've looked at the tally marks and you see, oh my gosh, this thing has way more than I thought.
Yeah. But then you probably would want to be asking, do I cut back or do I lean into this, and then make sure that other elements of the story support that this is a major theme.
Exactly. So in order to shake things up, you have to realize whether you're going to cut back or lean in. And if you lean in, you want to do it in a way that makes it not feel stale. So you still shake it up. You're like, okay, I'll keep using demons, but I realized I accidentally was using the same kind of demons a lot. I'm going to use different demons. I'm going to put in multiple factions among the demons that have different goals so that I can keep using demons, but it'll stay interesting.
So, like, I was always using destruction demons, so I'm going to do some more subtle trickery demons. Or I was always using subtle trickery demons, so I'm going to do some destruction demons now. That kind of thing.
Exactly. And so this is also the point in time when you're making these tally marks, you're figuring out where the repetition is, that we go back into try to figure out what the source of the repetition is.
I would say another thing that another tell you can watch for is if players are getting confused between particular elements. If they're like, wait, was that the mayor of that town or that town or that town? They all just kind of blend together.
Because they just seem too similar and they get them confused. That's another great way to figure out that something's going on and you may need to start keeping a list potentially. So when you're looking for the source, obviously as the GM, you will know that something you are doing is likely to be the source of the repetition. Although it might not be. It could be that it's just during session 0, the players always do things that lead towards the same element, and it actually was something that came organically from your group. But more often than not, it is. For player, though, it might actually come from something another player is doing, actually, or that the GM is doing. Like, perhaps your mechanical combat repetition actually happens because of the fact that one of the other players always casts a really powerful buff spell on you that makes it so that then the same exact thing is definitely the best move.
Or maybe you are in a group and there's one player who always plays a character who rushes forward and doesn't ask questions first and gets beat up, and you're the player who's noticed that, and so you're always playing a healer.
Yep. Or another similar one with, you could be in a group where no matter how much you beg and plead, there's another person who does that sudden charge that we were talking about before, and it's not you. And so that causes you to need to adjust what you were doing, because you to start out the campaign, were doing all sorts of different strategies. Like, okay, well, I guess I went first, but the enemies are over there, so I'll, like, raise my shield and I'll cautiously advance a little bit towards them so that I'm still 2 strides out, because we were 3 strides out to start off, and then I'll I'll intimidate one of them or something like that, and we'll get set up so that they have to spend actions to come towards us. And then the person's like, sudden charge! And you really, wait a minute, I can't do any of that stuff, because next turn, now that the fight has been stride, sudden charge all the way over to where they are, I'm going to have to spend all my actions to get over there. So now that means I also have to charge on my first turn. Or just pray that that person who sudden charges goes after the enemies in initiative. So, like, you can figure out that what's going on might not be with you as the source. And if somebody else is the source, then especially if you're the player, you need to ask yourself, even whether the repetition is enough of an issue that it's worth, like, trying to talk to the other person about it. Because if they like the repetition that they're doing, and you're a little uncomfortable with the repetition, but not that uncomfortable, it might be okay to just deal with it. Whereas if you're getting real tired of it...
But you can also potentially talk to your GM about adjustments that you can make that are between you and the GM. Like, for example, if you're just like, man, I took these feats because I liked this combo, but Leroy over here is always Jenkinsing into the battle, and so I can never actually use these. Talk to your GM about, like, hey, so Leroy's always charging in, which means these particular tactics don't work. Is it okay if I just, like, quick swap out these feats for ones that work better with Leroy? And your GM's probably going to be like, yeah, just retrain that. Because you're then trying to make things work.
Sure. I mean, it's possible your entire class has some issues with, like, the especially in Pathfinder, if you have a class that relies heavily on 2 action abilities and needs to be kind of close to your opponent, maybe you have spells with just a short range, or you have some kind of attacks that are not quite melee, but, like, have a small range. In that case, like, there may not be much you can do other than just, if you can't beat them, join them charging in like Leroy does. And even if you ask the GM if they can swap around the encounters, there's not much the GM can do other than putting enemies that can't be reached by Leroy, in which case
or
they might not be able to be
really
reached by
close
you.
so that you can generally reach them too.
Right. But it's sometimes hard to like trigger an encounter when you're really, really close. But you can do it with smaller rooms.
Small rooms. Yeah, small rooms or ambushes.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are ways to do it and to talk to someone, but you do have to identify, is this enough of a problem that it's worth talking to someone about? It's similar to the way that the GM determines, or that you determine, is the repetition that I'm causing actually so much of a repetition it's causing an issue, or is it just nicely creating a theme? So once you've done that, the next thing to do is, how do we shake this up? How do we stop ourselves from being repetitive? Let's assume now that we don't have to talk to someone, we don't have to do a negotiation. Maybe we've already done it, and now we're talking about how to solve it. Maybe we're the person who can change the repetition.
So are we the GM or the player for this one?
So, either one. So, one way to do it, especially if it's lore-wise and not mechanical, is to go back to our previous Saturday's episode and get a random table. If you are finding that when you generate things yourself, that it somehow becomes demons are behind it every time, then maybe you can roll on a random table of types of creatures to be the mastermind, and then you'll find that it is not demons.
Yeah. And the thing is that, if your players are like, yep, it's going to be demons again, even if it's demons a decent percentage of the time, they're going to remember that time it wasn't demons.
That's true.
So, if you realize, it's usually demons, and I'm decided I'm leaning into this, but demons are still a major part of the plot, then go ahead and deliberately introduce a time when it isn't demons to introduce kind of like that doubt in their mind before you go back to the main theme. I would recommend that.
Yes. Another way you can play with that is by having enemies who are, like, for example, disguising their actions under the guise of that it was demons. And that they're faking it to make it look like it was demons, but it was actually something else.
Yeah,
because your players will be quick to assume it was demons because every other time you ever did anything, it was always demons.
And then it's like, oh, well, then they realize other people in the world recognize that demons are responsible for a lot of problems, and then could hide behind that. So then that could also raise the doubt of, like, every time that we assumed that something in the past had to have been demons, was it really always demons?
Well, yeah, maybe it was sometimes this sneaky thieves guild that disguises things as demons.
And then we thought we solved it, but they really just moved away.
And they very occasionally summon demons so that you can see demons doing the things.
Yeah.
But often they just do it themselves and leave signs behind that it was demons. Maybe there's a new adversary that does that.
Yeah.
So, a random table can help you do it. But you can also just do it by thinking about the themes that you've established so far for your character or for the campaign with the repetition that you've created and trying to think of variations on that theme. We just talked about a false flag of it being the thing that it always was.
It could also be, you're flipping through a bestiary and you're saying, hey, I've never used this creature before. I could try that out. Or you're flipping through, like a list of spells, and you're like, I've never taken that spell with one of my characters before. I've never played this class before. I've never tried this before. Let's see that. Because if you try something new, and then if you find yourself kind of pulled toward, like, how do I sculpt this new thing into a familiar shape, like, try to push back against that impulse and, like, try something different with it.
And it's also okay to pick something that follows the theme you've established with your repetition, even though it's different. So here's a good example. We've used demons over and over and over again, right? So we have a theme of sin in this campaign. That means that it could be a sinful other person, like we talked about a thieves guild that's pretending it's demons. But what if it's an angel who's gone a bit too far with the fact that there's all these demons here and there's all this sin? And it's like, the only way we can stop all these demons in this world and root out the sin is this ridiculously over-the-top scheme of, so, sometimes you have to break a few eggs if you want to make an omelet.
Yes.
And so maybe that sort of could fit in with the theme that you've created with all of these demons, but it's not demons this time.
Yeah, or like demons have come on board and they're like, there's way too many demons doing stuff. Let's just go on this ridiculous rampage. And then, like, you wind up actually working together with demons against demons at some point.
Yeah. Or Quilipoths.
Yeah.
Or devils. Or whatever you want it to be. So you can find a way that it attaches to things. It doesn't have to be a jarring shift. And we talked a lot for the GM who's using demons too much, but for your character, when you're creating a new character and trying to be different or trying to make it so that your character doesn't just behave the same way every time and is going through a growth arc or has some differences or nuances in their personality or actions, it doesn't have to just suddenly be this jarring shift that comes out of left field.
Look for it. You can work with your GM too. Look for a situation where your character's standard operating procedure fails. And then when that happens, think about, instead of saying, let's double down on that, maybe this is an opportunity for your character to say, I should try a different tactic. I should try a different approach toward people. Maybe I'm going to challenge my views or my perspective based on what's happened here.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that can be a really organic way to build in a change. To ask, after something happens that shakes up your character, how does that change their beliefs and perspective?
And if you want to use that same technique as a GM, maybe you realize you've used too many demons, but at this point you've established that there's a lot of demons, but you actually don't want to keep using them that much. So maybe you do one last quest where they seal up this big giant hole to the abyss that all the demons were coming out of or something like that. And now, after this, there should be fewer demons. And so that's similar to the idea Linda gave for the character, where they go through a arc of character growth based on their tried and true techniques not working, and they need to do something different the next time. So there's a lot of ways to do this that don't have to be just sort of this meta shift where you just suddenly shift with no explanation, but they can make sense in-world, in-game, for the fiction and for the character.
Yeah, and another thing is, as GM, is that is introducing a shift in terms of, there's a lot of ways you can introduce a shift. Maybe there's a call for a quest that's in a different part of the world, and so the players then are going to be engaging with something different. Maybe you take a few sessions to play from the perspective of the players take control of some of the NPCs in the world and they get to see things from a different perspective. Maybe you take a break from your campaign and you do some one-shots, or you try a different game or things like that to try to shake things up. It can also, there's a lot of different ways to snap people out of the rut, and this can be valuable too, because when people come back to something after a little while, they might be able to look at it through fresh eyes.
So you got to the next topic that I wanted to go over with an excellent transition there, which is sometimes that source of the repetition. It's not you. It's not the other players. It's not the GM if you're not the GM, and it's not the players if you were the GM. It is the game system. Maybe the game system has a few spells that are just overpowered, or feats that are overpowered. Sure, you could try to go through and errata all of those to weaken them, and then your players just might get upset or not agree. Maybe if you've got good players, they'll agree that those are overpowered, and it's the same ones you think are that are causing the repetition, and that you can break things out of this meta cycle of it all being the same thing. But maybe you can't. Maybe just when you play that game, some of those elements are always going to be included. So, as Linda was getting at, one way that you might be able to shake things up is just play a different game. Because maybe the game was the culprit. Or, lore-wise, maybe the campaign setting was the culprit. Maybe the campaign setting of the Demon Moors is the reason why there were so many demons. So, if you switch up the campaign setting or the game that you're playing, maybe not even just to give yourself a palate cleanser and go back to the original one, but as a way to stop yourself from being repetitive because the repetition is coming from those two things.
Yeah, because I was thinking about the palate cleanser version, because you can also draw inspiration from playing something that's very different. But absolutely, switching things around, having multiple ongoing campaigns can definitely help with that.
And then that way, when people are like, all right, maybe say they told you there were too many demons. Okay, you know what? We haven't done demons in a while because we've been playing this game that doesn't have demons in it. We're okay with more demons. Let's go back to the Demon Moors and go through some more demons again.
Yeah.
So that is a great way to shake things up. You can also switch who's the GM. If you're just like, okay, the things that I'm repeating are not even like something as obvious as demons, but are like very in depth, like elements that are like 2 steps below the surface, but that make things very predictable for everybody and are very difficult to shake up. Hey, if you switch to another GM, unless they've like internalized your very specific things from playing with you as the GM, and then they repeat the same thing, even then they'll do it in their own way, and it might feel a lot more different. So switching up GM, switching and playing with a different set of players entirely a little bit, that doesn't mean fire your players, but it could mean like add a couple new players, and maybe there's one person who's like, I will just stay in the first campaign because I don't have as much time.
I don't have as much time, so I can't join a campaign on Saturday. I can only play every other Tuesday, but then you have a campaign that's like, all right, it has these players. It has 3 of the players from this group and then 2 new players that can meet on Saturday.
New people with new ideas are some of the best ways to shake things up, especially if you find that it's sort of an emergent property of repetition that is sort of dispersed among everyone.
When you have new people, it's important to like really encourage them to share their ideas and to support those.
Rather than them getting stuck in the meta by just listening to the veterans telling them what has worked so far for them in the meta, letting the new players experience the game and come up with their own ideas. Now, depending on what game you're playing, that might be difficult. If you're playing like 3rd edition or Pathfinder 1, and you just let the new players do whatever they're going to do, they could easily wind up being a character who is 20 to 100 times worse than the characters that your veterans are playing who are super optimized. And that can be an issue and maybe a reason not to use those games as the first game that somebody is playing. But if you're playing a game where there's a decently high floor and a decently low ceiling on what the power can be, such that you're not worried they're going to make something that literally doesn't function.
This also applies both in terms of build and in terms of like approaches to issues.
Yes, absolutely.
And challenges.
So if you need to at least be playing a game where the players are able to make a competent build without being coached.
Yes.
But then often it is actually their approach to problem solving that winds up being the most refreshing and interesting for a new player.
Well, even then, if it's one where the builds are more complicated, then you can still work with people in terms of like talk about what kinds of things you want your character to be able to accomplish. That's
true, but if they then need to be like entirely built by the experienced player to like be functional, it can be tricky to get new things out of that player because the experienced player will wind up inserting enough of the group's meta into the character that it'd be like, okay, well, I guess my 4 spells are these meta extremely powerful spells, so I'm going to cast those. And then they are the same spells the group always casts.
It depends upon how much like the player can separate themselves from that. From that meta and how entrenched it is.
So that's just why I suggest selecting a game that does not have a high optimization ceiling and a low optimization floor as the first one where you bring in someone new, especially if you're bringing in the new person because you want new blood for new ideas to shake things up.
Yeah.
You can still do it. Look, I've done it before. I loved and played a lot of 3.0, 3.5 and Pathfinder 1, and I brought in new players that way. But those are just not recommended for bringing in new players specifically to shake things up.
Yep.
So, we talked about all the different sources.
I also think that the typical player probably doesn't spend as much time talking to their GM about their character build as I did.
Well, I mean, that's fair. So we talked about all the different sources of where the repetition can come from, how it might not be where you think it is, how to detect repetition if it's not obvious or if someone's not telling you about it, and then some easy ways to try to shake things up and fix repetition. So that's what I wanted to cover. Did you have anything else?
No, that was what I had in mind as well.
Great. So everyone, please like and subscribe and even join if you'd like to support us. We're going to have a vote for the final, not for the final, at the end of the episode here, we're going to have a vote for next Saturday's episode. I see we have a vote from
David for 3.
So here we have
in-game time pressure.
In-game time pressure, Save My Game Q&A, Build a Hazard Workshop. Just put the number in chat if you want to do it. We have Our Game Mark plays Donsbury Days, and we're not playing the original one again, which you can already find on this channel. This would be playing the new expansion that is, I think, levels 5 to 8 or something like that. We received a copy like a few days ago early from the creator. There is an embargo until it actually comes out. However, our next episode on Saturday is one day after it comes out.
And therefore, we will be able to play it for the first time.
The embargo. We technically have it before it comes out, but we cannot play it until then.
Well, at least not live.
Yes. We could play it ourselves.
But we should try it out for the first time on screen. Let people see it. It looks like that's what people want to see.
It looks like at least 3 people have voted for that versus 1 who has not.
Oh, did you give XP to the folks who are watching?
I have not, so let me give a quick XP. I hope you stayed for the vote, because otherwise you did not get it. Alright. So, yeah, 3-1 majority rules. It looks like we're going to be playing Dawnsbury Days on Saturday, the level 5 to 8 version. Now, I don't know what's going to happen there, and if it just is going to pick off where the other one left off, because we spent a lot on consumables due to the fact that it was going to be the final encounter, and we just didn't need the money anyway, and so we're going to get wrecked on +1 armor.
We'll see. We'll see. We'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out.
I think, some of it's also going to have to do with for example...
the creator told me that they had added leshies, but the only way to use the leshies, I guess, would be not to use our original characters, if that's even allowed. I don't know. We'll figure it out.
We'll have to investigate.
Also, if it's still the same 4 characters, they're gonna look like orc and 3 humans.
Yes.
Even if one of them is but there's really a Leshy. Unless what they did is add that NPC-friendly Leshy who sometimes follows you as an extra 5th character or something like that.
We'll find out. We'll have to see.
We'll find out next
Saturday. We'll explore it
Saturday.
in real time with you guys.
Take care. Have a good weekend,